As we're working through the end of the summer here, heading into the new start of the year, we've been working on this sermon series that we call Who Are We? And what I've been trying to do, working with people around here, is to discern what are the streams that have led Crossroads to be the place that it is today. Looking around and seeing what kind of church we are, what are the different pieces of history and belief and emphasis that have made us who we are? It seems like a good thing to me to not always be forward-focused, but also to be reverent of how we got here. What are the stories that have created a community like ours? So the past few weeks, we have addressed and talked about things like we care for the mission of the world, and we talked about missions and how we're a part of that story. We've talked about how important children and teens have become as a part of our ministry here at the church. Last week, we talked about being a worshiping and praying community and how vital that is. In the next few weeks, we're going to talk about caring for people and how it is we care for people. Talking about the work of evangelism and how that's been a vital part of who we are and who we want to be. And then finally, we're going to talk about wrestling with culture and thought and what's happening in our world. But today, I want to address the denominational piece. We are a part of the Church of the Nazarene. And so what does that mean, right? Other than just a couple of letters on a sign, what does it mean to be a part of the Church of the Nazarene? And what about that has helped formulate us as a particular community in this place? And so we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the church and the history of us in this place. But in order to do so, in order to set that up, I want to walk through some stories of the scripture that led into our history. And so I want to talk to you about my favorite Hebrew word. My favorite Hebrew word, this is always an exciting way to start a sermon, right? I can see you already. Great. Here we go. My favorite Hebrew word is kabod. How about that word, right? Kabod. It sounds like an onomatopoeia, like something's going to explode. Kabod. Kabod is translated very technically and literally as heavy. All right? Heavy. Kabod means heavy. But when it's translated into our English in the Old Testament, it's always translated instead as glory. So when you read a story like Moses telling God, we'll talk about this in just a minute, show me your glory, he's saying, God, show me your kabod. When Isaiah says, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, the whole earth is filled with his kabod. This word shows up over and over and over. Its English translation is glory. Its literal translation is heavy. But we know a little bit about heavy meaning something more than a box that's too much for us to carry. Heavy in the 60s and 70s became a colloquial slang word that people who were super cool used, right? Some of you were cool enough to use this word in your youth. You might have said heavy in terms of it's really cool. Or someone may have told you something that was depressing, like our actions of polluting the waters may create a problem of cancer for our children. And you might have said, whoa, that's heavy. Right? I wasn't there. You guys have to affirm this. It could also mean intense. It could also mean something that weighs on your mind. We know this idea of the word heavy meaning something more than just weighty, right? That there's something about it that weighs on us. This is the idea of the Old Testament word of glory, that when God's presence shows up, there's a weightiness to it. You can't control it, you can't hold it, and it kind of pins you down in the moment. This is what the glory of God looks like in the Old Testament. My hope is that you have a moment or a time or an experience or a place where you've been, that you have experienced the kabod of God. The glory of God in such a way that it's weighty or meaningful. Something that you can root yourself in, that when times of doubt or struggle or concern or worry about giving yourself to God's future come, and you begin to feel that anxiety about whether or not you should continue on, there are moments where God's glory was so full in your life that you knew that God's presence was real to you, that you can anchor your future in the past of God having shown up. I hope you've had experiences like that. I hope right now your brain is racing through a moment or two or three in your life where the kabod of God made itself known to you. I want to tell you a quick story because it ties into our denomination of a moment where I could tell you the kabod of God fell upon a room that I was in. We were at what was called General Assembly. Now, General Assembly is a denominational meeting, and generally, my experience is that God does not show up at denominational meetings. That was supposed to be a joke. Yeah, okay. Denominational, they are what they are, right? And so we're in this General Assembly meeting, and the band comes out to sing a song that everyone knows and can sing backwards, forwards, up and down, very familiar, a song called Revelation Song. Most of you know this song, I think. We've sung it here a bunch. And so they start singing this song, and there's a certain point, you're sitting there thinking, yeah, I know this song, it's a pretty song, I like this song. And something happened in the singing of that song. It was in 2017 in Indianapolis. That was unprepared. You're just unprepared for it. And the whole room just began to cry. And I could tell you the whole room began to cry because weirdly I was crying, and I don't ever cry. But the presence of God was so thick, you just knew that God was there. And so I have a video of this moment. I'm going to show you just about 2 minutes. It goes on for 8 minutes. But you'll see some things happening that hopefully will pique your interest a little bit. But one of the things is you can see the bottom of the crowd, and you can see this is like the modern proof that something is happening. Cell phones start turning on towards the front. And that's like this generation's version of raising their hands, I think. And so just watch what happens. This perfectly like us woman walks out and begins singing a song that we all know, and something happens. And even though you probably won't feel the weightiness of that moment, you can get the idea of what a holy moment it might have been. Watch this clip real fast.
Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Holy, holy is He. Would you sing it with me? Sing a new song. Sing a new song to Him who sits on heaven's mercy seat. We sing holy, 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 holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Oh, with all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Oh, we adore you, God. Oh, we Guana ya shabire hi ya tsonero uya halalela
Langa serebo uasalambe tiko tiko loloma Santo, 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 Dios Todopoderoso, ¿quién fue, quién es y quién vendrá? La creación hoy canta y damos gloria a Él. Tú eres digno por siempre y siempre.
And so that moment carried on for like another 6 or 7 minutes, just nation after nation, language after language, coming out and singing about the glory of heaven. And it was wild. You read these lines of every nation, tribe, and tongue being in the presence of God, and then you see it. And it was a foretaste of what the glory of God in heaven will be like. And it fell upon the room, and people felt it. It was an amazing experience. And God has a way of breaking in to what you assume will be mundane moments and transforming the spirit of his people. And he did it in that moment. It was powerful. It was incredible to sing of heaven and then see it play out in front of you. What an incredible moment that was full of kabod. It was full of the heaviness and the weightiness and the glory of God. These moments in our life are vitally important because knowing the glory of God, knowing personally an encounter with God, I believe helps us moving forward in the moments that are mundane and remain mundane to be able to see the fingerprints of God's presence all over those moments. When we have time, when we're in the fullness and the weightiness of God, we're able to identify how God is at work in the moments that are more quiet and calm, regular and plain. Moses shows us this, I think, in his story. His story of the glory of God is one of my favorites in Exodus. You know the story pretty well. It all begins with the people of Israel being enslaved, and they groan out. They groan out just in general, and God hears them because God made a covenant with their forefather Abraham. And he sees their enslavement, and God's heart breaks for the Israelite people. And so he goes to Moses, and his presence shows up. His glory is there in a burning bush, and he says, Moses, go back to Egypt and set my people free. And Moses isn't super excited about this idea because he's got a stutter and a murder rap back in Egypt. And so he's asked to go to a place where he's a wanted man and say, hey, Pharaoh, for free, let all of your free labor go, okay? And Moses knows this is insane. He's like, I'm a bad public speaker. I'm going to get thrown in jail. There's no way the most powerful man on the planet is going to go for this. And God says, go. And sure enough, God empowers Moses. God gives him an ability to speak and perform miracles. And before long, these people that God loves are set free. And they go and they cross across a dry Red Sea that then engulfs the Egyptian army behind them. And they get to the other side, and now they're headed towards the promised land, a land that's flowing with milk and honey that's been promised to them so that they can thrive and have good life. And the people struggle because they forget what God had just done for them and can't imagine what God is going to do for them in the future. And so the story comes where Moses is receiving the law, and the law is meant to be a mark upon the people that gives them an abundant life. If they can follow the law, they will have a thriving, abundant life in this land that produces over and over and over. But they can't see it, and so they struggle with sin. Moses is up on the mountain talking with God. God's inscribing 10 commandments onto these stone tablets, and he's telling them about what the people should look like in the land. And then God finally says, hey, Moses, I don't want to make you turn around or anything, but they're at it again. And Moses says, you've got to be kidding me. He says, yeah, they're down there making a golden sacrifice. Some days I'd just like to wipe those people out. And Moses says, well, hold it right there. I'll deal with them. And so Moses talks God out of his anger, which is an interesting thing, goes down the mountain, and he sees his own brother taking everyone's gold and burning it down, melting it down, and then making a golden calf. And Moses just wants to crack his brother across the head. What are you thinking? And Moses burns with anger. He throws down the tablets and breaks them, and now he's mad. And he goes back up, and God and Moses have this meeting of angry people at the top of the mountain. What are they going to do now? And Moses says, I don't even know how to lead these people. If I can't even leave them alone for a couple days without them making idols, how am I going to lead them into the land you have promised? And God says, my presence will go before you. And Moses says, that's great. It's wonderful. How am I going to know that? How are they going to see that? What in the world am I going to do to help them believe that this is the case? And the Lord says, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. And Moses has one last demand for God. He says, show me your kabod. He demands it. He doesn't ask, hey, is it possible for me to see a little bit of that glory so I can understand it? He says to God, show me your glory. And God says that he will do that he'll pass in front of him so that in his presence he will know the glory of God, and that he will then know that God's presence is with him, and he can distinguish the work of God amongst all of the things in earth. And so he says to Moses that he's going to push him into the cleft of a rock, passed by him, and that if Moses saw his face, he would die because of the weightiness of the glory of God. But that if instead the glory passed by, Moses could turn and look upon the backside of God, and that he could see his glory. So the hand of God pushes Moses into a rock, the glory of God goes by, and Moses jumps out to see a peek of the backside of God, and he's overwhelmed by having been in the presence of God. He goes down the mountain a new man, and when he gets to the bottom of the mountain, all of the Israelites are like, dude, your face is like a sun. We can't even look at you. Being in the presence of God changed him physiologically. It wasn't just this spiritual mojo stuff. Like literally Moses was changed in his experience with God. And he was different as a leader of the people. He led them with conviction and belief. He saw God's work all among them. His experience in the presence of God, in the weighty glory of God, allowed him to identify the fingerprints of God's work all over their communal life with one another. Being in the presence of God shaped and changed Moses. Taking moments in time to be in the glory of God helps us identify the work that God is doing in our life when we can't otherwise see it with our own eyes. I tell you this story of glory. I lead all of this up in a talk where I'm going to talk about what it means to be a part of the Church of the Nazarene because of our origins. The church began in Los Angeles. This denomination began. And it didn't start by someone waking up one day and saying, you know what I'm going to do? You know what this world really needs is another denomination. That's never how it happens, right? Instead, what was going on was a particular moment in the city of Los Angeles with a particular pastor who was feeling the call of God to help minister to this situation. Right about the turn of the century leading into the 1900s, the Santa Fe Railroad was finished from Chicago to Los Angeles. The movie industry in New York decided that now that that was starting to fly and they had money, that they'd like to live in a better climate. Hard to blame them. So things like this are all happening in the moment that's ending up the 1800s. And so from the year 1870, when there were about 5,000 people living in Los Angeles, until about the year 1900, there were 100,000 people living in Los Angeles. That's a 20-fold population increase in less than 30 years. That's insane. And that's hard to manage and keep up with. And so what was going on at that time with the railroad making its way there, the gold rush having ended, people were moving out to the Los Angeles area in droves. And people who were wealthy were beginning businesses, but many more people were looking for a new life there. And so there were only so many jobs, and there was a higher supply of workers than there were jobs. And so in the midst of this changing and increasing culture, there was also an abject poverty on the bottom level of Los Angeles culture. There were fat cats rolling in big money, and there was a huge population of people who were fighting each other just to have work. And Phineas Bresee, this Methodist pastor, saw this happening in his society. And as he looked upon the people who were struggling in poverty, he saw that when hope ended, they turned to things like alcoholism. They turned to things like gambling. They turned to all sorts of things that were destroying the fabrics of their family in their own struggle in depression. And he had this huge heart for the vices that were consuming the lower class of the city that was forming, that he was pastoring in. And so he didn't want to approach them with a judgmentalism. He wanted to approach them with the gospel that saves people from destruction. And so he began preaching and ministering to them. And he started this church for them. And he didn't want to call it like Third Presbyterian or Second Methodist or something stuffy like that. Church in those days were very formal. And the more formal it was, the more people who were poor and didn't have nice things felt like they were on the outside. So he started a church called the Glory Barn. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really feel like deep in my soul that I'm likely to attend a church called the Glory Barn. I'm just going to be honest with you. But that's where we began, because he wanted to create a place for people that people felt like they could go to, and that they could bring their own story and their own struggle there, and people's lives began to be changed. Families that were wrecked by alcoholism came back together. People were giving up their vices and their struggles. Families were coming back together, and they were given opportunities to begin to advance themselves. In fact, from the very beginning, the Church of the Nazarene has invested a lot of effort and energy into education. We have 8 colleges across the United States and Canada invested in helping people who want to be formed as Christians and vocationally do so and try to reach families that didn't have that opportunity. It's been a great thing for us. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. But Phineas Brzee wanted to start this church that helped people who didn't feel like they had a place in the church. And so he preached the gospel to them, and they came in droves to the Glory Barn. Eventually, this church would start hearing that there were other groups across America that were wrestling with very similar sort of things. Urbanization was taking off, and there was this sense that there was a space in America for the holiness message. Not for the sake of making people feel like they had to be better, but because actual sin and struggle was tearing apart the fabric of people's families and lives. And so they started speaking to each other across America, and they came together and decided to call themselves the Church of the Nazarene. Now, I told you this story a couple weeks ago, but I'm going to repeat it because I think it's so good. Phineas Brzee was working with the second president of the University of Southern California. Go Trojans. Okay? That's the Southern California, the president. His name was J.P. Whitney. And they were talking about what to name this movement that was happening. And they pointed to John chapter 1, the Gospel of John, where in the story I'm going to read in just one moment of Philip and Nathanael talking to each other and wrestling with who this Messiah was. And so I'm going to set this up real quick by starting at the beginning of John chapter 1. This book starts very different than the other Gospels. It wants to situate Jesus as God. It's not going to get to that later. We're going to start with this, and we're going to start with the words of Genesis, in the beginning. And so the Gospel of John wants you to know this Jesus that we meet in this story didn't just come on the scene in year 0 or whatever. This Jesus has been pre-existent with God at creation, and Jesus has been made known in flesh among us. So it begins, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, He was with God in the beginning. Jesus is pre-existent. Jesus is creator. And then we're told in verse 14 that the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. And then it says this, we have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. This Jesus has come to show us the same glory that Moses had to be hid in a rock for. Okay? Because God has loved us so much, God has yearned for our salvation so deeply that His plan of salvation is to put Himself in the flesh that we are in and dwell amongst us. To live with us, so that the glory that Moses had to hide in a rock from and only peek upon the backside of could now be seen in full in Jesus Christ. The glory that was once hidden is now revealed in full. By the self-giving act of God, God has come and given us the gift of His presence in glory in a concrete, tangible way. And this is what Philip and Nathanael meet. But where this Jesus comes from shocks them. And so we're going to read that story quickly. John chapter 1, verses 43 to 51, just a few verses after this announcement that the Creator has veiled himself in flesh and has shown us his glory in a tangible way, we're given this interaction. Would you join me in standing as we read the word of the Lord today? The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, "Here is a true Israelite in whom there is nothing false." "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus said, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You shall see greater things than that." He then added, "I tell you the truth, you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So we have this moment where the glory of God that had to hide Moses in the cleft of a rock has now been veiled in flesh and come to dwell among us as a gift of God's love so that we can be saved. And this gift of Jesus comes from Nazareth? Something that good should come from a better place. Not the town across the tracks where all of the low-class people live. Nobody walks through Nazareth. Everyone walks around Nazareth. And the Gospel of John wants to make it a point that this fullness of glory, this self-revelation of God, this gift sent to us to save us from sin, has come from a backwards across the tracks town. And the Church of the Nazarene from the beginning looked at that text and said, yeah, we want the people of Los Angeles and the world to know that even if they're from across the tracks, even if they're not cleaned up, even if they're not good enough, even if they have a reputation, Jesus comes and dwells among them too. And so the Church of the Nazarene as a name is a recognition that the gospel is for all people, from all places. It doesn't matter if your history is marked with things that embarrass you. It doesn't matter if your history or story is marked by incredible sin. It doesn't matter if you're not proud of yourself. It doesn't matter if you're too poor. It doesn't matter if your clothes are shabby. It does not matter who you've been. Jesus identifies with the worst of us because he grew up in the worst of places. And so our denomination has always been one that has been shaped around this idea that no one is too far away from the salvation of God, that God yearns to embody the lives of people even if they're not good enough. And so we've identified with that from the very beginning, whether it's in our story of who we began ministering to or how we crafted our name itself. We have put such an emphasis on the possibility of Jesus' transformation for all people from all walk of lives, from all socioeconomic, from all ethnic, from all neighborhood or nation, no matter where you have come from, no matter how you have fallen short, no matter how much you struggle, Jesus shows up in those places. And he's done so since the beginning. And so the Church of the Nazarene, out of this historic story, has decided to identify, wrap itself around three major themes, three major ideas that tie us together that are important to us. We say we're a Christian church, a holiness church, and a missional church. And this works as a beautiful and wonderful story. We gather together as a people who are focused on Jesus. We preach, we worship, we have small groups that are focused on Christ. We want to know him, we want to learn about him, we want to grow to be like him, and we want his very name to mark out who we are. When we say, I am a Christian, we are saying, I am like Christ. I am his ambassador. I yearn to make his name known in a good way. We are Christian. And then from there, we yearn to be a holiness people as well, which means we want to be like Jesus. We are a people who want to know the character of Christ and pray that God would stamp his character on our heart, that we could be like him. And we don't do this. Again, there have been eras of holiness denomination that it's been all about oppressing people, saying, you should do this, you can't do this is what a good person, this is what a bad person. That's not really the point. The point is to say that when we are like Christ, we are saved from things that trip us up. We are saved from sin that's yearning to tear us down. That Christ-likeness leads us to abundant life. It frees us from the shackles of things that want to take us down. This is what holiness is about yearning to be like Christ so that we can be saved from the worst of this world. And we find that we then are put on trajectories of eternal life, of not having to wrestle with the things that are destroying people's lives if we just look around. That God is yearning for us to be his holy people for the sake of the world, but also for the sake of us. And then from there, we're called to be missional. That we yearn as a people, just like Moses and just like Philip and Nathanael here, to spend time in the glory of God in such a way that we have to tell about it. We have to go and share. We can't just receive the glory of God and build markers and say, hey, the glory of God showed up here in 2004. But instead, the glory of God comes and fills us, and we go and we become glory bearers for the sake of the world, telling them about the possibility of what Jesus does. This church has been an embodiment for 120 years now of these three principles. In 1910, we were founded as Baltimore First Church of the Nazarene. We don't go by that name anymore, but we carry that history as Crossroads. We are the first expression of the Church of the Nazarene in the Baltimore city and the Baltimore area. We have done things that are missional, and we're trying again to really be missional for the sake of our community and world. So we've done things in just recent history, let alone ancient history, just recent history of building this section of the church that was a missional activity. We meet here for worship now, but it's a gymnasium so we can be an open place to our community. And it's the place that we meet God. And then people from all walks of life come in here and shoot hoops. And they have classes and they take tests in the place that we know God meets us. That's a powerful thing. We're working today to reestablish relationships with the city of Baltimore, going to the school system and doing missional work so that we can be a place that doesn't just simply dwell in here, but that we go out as well. And in the mission of the world, we have done things in this church like working to establish the Child Development Center in India and helping start the Church of the Nazarene in the island of Curacao. We have been focused on being Christian holiness and then sending it out for all of our history. And so today, we find ourselves a part of a big movement of people, and we're one expression in story in that. And I think it's really exciting to be a part of a denomination. I know we live in a time and a place where institutions are kind of poo-pooed and people like to take shots at institutions, and I can understand that inclination, but the gathering together of a network of people allows us to do more than we're capable of ourselves. It also gives us an opportunity as pastors to be accountable to people above us and then also in this building. And so we have people who oversee us as pastors to make sure that some of the abuses that churches have caught themselves in for the last thousands of years are trying to be mitigated. We are accountable to someone above us, and then we're accountable to people in this church as well. The denomination offers us that. It gives us missional opportunities to connect with other people. Right now, I checked this morning, so I had the most up-to-date number. Right now, the Church of the Nazarene has 30,574 churches in 162 world areas, plus 12 creative access areas that we can't count or name because it would put missionaries in danger. That leads to 2.471 million members of the Church of the Nazarene in 6 regions across the world. They operate 51 colleges and universities worldwide, and there are there are also 234 child development centers in the world, including the ones that we have been working with in India, that help orphans and impoverished children have a chance to be shaped, fed, given nutrition and love, and also told the gospel. This is the kind of work that we could not do on our own. But every time the offering plate is passed and you put $1 in, we give back a portion of that to be a part of this network of work for the sake of the gospel in the world. And so all of these things are happening because you help support it. And so when we're talking about being missional, there's a personal call on us as a church, but we're also trying to embody it from an administrative level as well. And you, all of you, are a part of all of that exciting work in the world. And I just think that's great. And I think being a part of a denomination like ours gives us opportunities to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And so the strategy continues for the Church of the Nazarene. We continue to be a global mission church, hoping that we can be a part of continuing to plant the gospel in places that it's not even yet welcome in the world. We're seeing explosions of the gospel in places like Indonesia. Indonesia. In the last 10 years, I think the church has gone from 1 person to 100,000 people in a Muslim-dominated country. And that's been the work of the Church of the Nazarene. Exciting things are happening across the world, and we continue to strategize to share the gospel in all places. But even as that work is happening across the world, we are then expected to be the local expression of that mission work as well. We're not just trying to save people in Jakarta or Paris or Rio. We're the missionaries to Howard County, to Baltimore. We've been given a call to tell the good news of what God can do to save us from the shackles of sin. We are called to enter into the glory of God in this place and then to go be glory bearers, telling the story of God's possibility to people here. And so we have a local strategy as well, one that is for all ages. We start with a great nursery program here. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but we are trying to develop Christian folks from birth all the way through the entire part of our life. And so we have a nursery program here. We have preschool programs here. We have younger kids and then older kids. Pastor Lynn has been strategizing how to keep our 4th and 5th graders engaged. And so she's created Tribe 45 in the last year. And that's brought new life to them, and Jesse's planning to receive those kids then into youth group, and we have plans to help them through junior high and senior high. And the plan doesn't stop there. One of the great things about being a part of the Church of the Nazarene is our investment in colleges and universities, because we know those are critical years in your kids' lives. And so I don't want to throw any college or university under the bus. God calls us to go all sorts of places. And there's incredible schools in this area, UMBC, University of Maryland, Virginia, Towson. They're all really good schools. But we've made it an emphasis in our denomination as well to create streams to get our kids into Nazarene colleges and universities as well. This is part of our plan of discipleship for our young people, that they would have an opportunity to graduate from our youth groups and then go to very serious, cutting-edge, strong places of learning that focus on vocational training while also forming the people in Christ, so that we're creating strong Christian folks ready to head into the workforce. Jesse is beginning, Pastor Jesse, if you don't know him, is beginning to have regular trips to colleges and universities that are within driving distance of this church in the Church of the Nazarene. And the first one we're going to is Mount Vernon. And so he's talked a little bit about the teens, but I'm looking at you parents now, and I talk to you parents, and I hear you all talk about how nervous you are about getting college scholarships and getting your kids into activities so they have I know you're thinking about college already, even for those of you who have kids. I know this. And so we're trying to help you with this by giving them exposure to what the possibilities of Christian education could look like. And so in September, the 19th, 20th, and 21st of September, Jesse is going with a group of our high school kids to Mount Vernon University and starting the process of doing this annually. There's going to be a music festival there, Christian bands. There's going to be all sorts of opportunities to learn about what Christian education could look like. And he's invited the teens to go with him, but parents, I'm telling you, if you're interested, you can go too. You can drive yourself, get yourself a hotel room, hang out with Jesse and his kids, and see what the school systems look like. And we're going to try to do this 3 times a year at 3 different schools because I believe, in this next step of development and how Christian education can be a huge part of helping them form and anchor themselves in the faith as they're learning who they'll be vocationally. And so if you're interested in hearing more about that, it's non-committal to go and talk to Jesse. If you've met Jesse, he does not bite. He's not capable of it. He's so nice, right? So talk to him, hear more, learn about what the opportunities are, and we'll keep putting these things in front of you, trying to help you out, because our hope then is that they then come out and invest themselves back into the church, that having been to Nazarene Christian College, they then become good standing members who use what they've learned for the glory of God back into the church. This is one of the major strategies that we have. And so for that trip, and I'm just about going to close with this, the chaplain of Mount Vernon Nazarene University has sent us a personalized message about 2 minutes today, inviting us to join her in this particular weekend coming up. So let's hear from Stephanie Lobdell.
Hi, Crossroads Church of the Nazarene. My name is Stephanie, and I am the campus pastor at Mount Vernon Nazarene University in Mount Vernon, Ohio. I'm excited to hear that Pastor Jesse is bringing a group of students here in September for our Sunfest. It's going to be great to meet you in person and to introduce you to the culture of this campus. I've only been here about 30 days, but it's been such a positive experience as I've experienced the welcoming, hospitable spirit of this campus, the collaborative, let's work together toward a common good kind of place. It's a great place to be. Well, the mission of Mount Vernon is to educate the whole person and to cultivate Christ-likeness for lifelong learning and service. Now that looks super great on a brochure, right? But it also is truly at the heart of every faculty and staff and administrative person that I've met. They deeply desire for students to be competent in their field, while at the same time have a deeply rooted faith in Jesus Christ that shapes everything that they do. Now, as a campus pastor, my heart is to meet students exactly where they're at, whether they come to me excited about their faith and eager to grow, or whether they're apathetic or kind of nominal, or even if they're opposed to the faith and say, I'm not really interested, but you got an engineering program, so I'm in. I meet you in that space and say, you are the beloved of God, exactly as you are. Whether you are in, whether you are out, whatever you are, you, above all, are the beloved of God. And as we begin to rest in that belovedness and find ourselves secure in the love of God, we recognize also that we are invited on this adventure of transformation and of consecration to God as He invites us, as God invites us to participate in the redemption of this creation through our vocation, whatever that might be. Now, there are so many different ways we do that on campus, and it would be wonderful to meet your students and introduce them to how they can be a part of what's going on at Mount Vernon. I would love to chat with you anytime, so feel free to get my contact info from Pastor Tim, and we can go from there. But Mount Vernon's a wonderful community, and I'm just grateful to be a part of this Nazarene family where we can learn and grow together. Thanks.
More than anything, more than being a part of any denomination, more than part of networks or colleges or anything, I hope that you heard today that we have a history of coming into the glory of God, that's the work that we're called to as a church, gathering on Sundays and calling upon the glory of God, the kabod of God to come and meet us. My hope and prayer is that at some point today you felt and experienced that the glory of God was in this place. And my hope is that becomes transformative to you, a part of your pattern of life, that you come on Sunday to experience the presence and glory of God. So as you go from this place, like Moses, you know that God has gone before you, and it will lead you into whatever has come. And spending time in the glory of God like this, expecting that God will show up, allows us to see and discern and identify the fingerprints of God all over the life that we live. That when we know God because we've worshiped God and been in God's presence, then we can identify how God has been with us in the quiet moments, the less intense moments, the more mundane moments. And so I'm going to invite you to stand as we sing this final song. And perhaps you would like to pray. And I'd invite you to pray a particular kind of prayer, a prayer that I'm not so sure that we're good at anymore. We've become really good at request prayers. God, help me raise my child. God, help me find money to pay this bill. God, help me to not be ill. But I wonder if we've lost our ability to pray the prayer that Moses prayed to God, which is just simply, God, show me your glory. Help me to know you. Help me to see you. And maybe today you'd like to try that risky, different prayer. As we sing this closing song today, the altars are open. If you'd like to come forward and pray that prayer and reconnect yourself with the personhood of God and practice again saying, God, show me your glory. Help me to know it. The altar is open for you if you'd like to pray like that today. If not, join me in singing.